What's cracking, my Kryptonians? So I saw that new Superman flick that the youngsters have been ranting and raving about, and golly gee, I gotta say, it was quite a swell time. I was not necessarily looking forward to the new Superman movie. Nothing against it, of course. As you might be able to tell, either from the shirt or, just the channel in general. I am more of a Batman guy through and through. Superman, admittedly, was always a little bit boring to me, and I know that's blasphemy to say, especially in a Superman review. Take that however you will. If that offends you, then get out of here. I'm kidding. No, it's whatever. But when you have a superhero that can do anything and everything, and all of his enemies have to either have his same move set or always utilize kryptonite in some way, it just kind of removes the stakes, And granted, like any superhero, you know that at the end of the day, they're going to be okay. They're not going to kill this superhero in their own movie, although they have before. But at least, like with Batman, there was some mystery as to like how he would defeat the villain. It wasn't just necessarily like, I'm gonna punch you in the freaking face, which is sort of what Superman has devolved into. Although there is a lot of punching in the freaking face in Batman as well, so I suppose it's a bit hypocritical of me. Nevertheless, whenever something Superman related came on as a child, I would usually skip it. I did see the Richard Donner movies, I did see Superman Returns, I saw the Man of Steel movies, and yeah. The only thing really involving Superman that I kind of liked growing up was the Justice League cartoon. Superman was not really my favorite hero in that either, and I would kind of say the same for Captain America as well. Again, I know it's kind of blasphemy to say it these days, but the overly kind of like boyish, patriotic superheroes was never really my speed. Maybe it's just because I had a bit of a dark, brooding life myself, and so Batman just always a little bit more my speed, my taste. And so I get that it's a very fine line that you have to toe with really any superhero, but especially Superman, because Superman in any given scenario is kind of the straight man, and it's a tough job being the straight man. You have to be very by the book, you can't break the rules, and so you always kind of know that it can't get too interesting, you know what I mean? And in all fairness, like I could be totally wrong in all of this because I haven't really done a deep dive on the Superman comics. From what I have seen, I'm not too far off the mark. But that said, I can totally see why he connects with people. He is supposed to be this symbol of hope and perfection and idealism. A lot of people have considered him to be like this almost Jesus-like Messiah figure, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think, if anything, he's more of like a Moses figure, someone who comes along and kind of guides people to where they need to be, versus this ideal of like something to strive for, per se. Because Superman is one of a kind. Obviously, there are other superheroes in the DC universe, but nobody else can be Superman. That's the whole point, is that he is unique and one of a kind, whereas anyone can technically be Batman. If you just save those pennies, kids, stop buying that avocado toast, and train super hard, like you could, in theory, be Batman, or a version of Batman. And so, with that in mind, I wasn't necessarily excited for the movie just based on the fact that it was a Superman movie. I was more excited because it was a complete, clean slate for the DCU in general. So I was really excited to see what James Gunn had in store for the overall tone and visual style of not just Superman, but all of these characters. Especially interesting to me because, not being quite as familiar with Superman and his world and some of these other supporting characters, there was still this like weird feeling of freshness for me, which has become something of a novelty anymore with all the Batman movies, all of these recurring heroes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I kind of know a lot about the characters on screen. So for me, even though I did know Guy Gardner, maybe Hawkgirl, because I saw her in Justice League, but pretty much everyone else was completely new to me. So there was was an excitement about it, and there did seem to be a fun and an optimism that, at least to me, has been kind of missing from recent DC movies. So going into it, I was cautiously optimistic. You know, James Gunn is someone that I think puts everything into his movies. A lot of heart, a lot of soul, a lot of humor, action. Like he has such a unique, kind of fun, interesting way of doing things. Not only does he know the characters, which I think before this with the Guardians were kind of relatively more obscure characters that he then made step into the spotlight. Because they didn't have as many preconceived notions of who they should be, he was able to kind of do more things with them. Because honestly, like before the Guardians movies, who really knew Star-Lord or Gamora or Drax? Like some hardcore Marvel fans, sure, but it was really the films that made them kind of explode in popularity. Whereas with Superman, everybody knows Superman, right? So I feel like I was a little bit curiously cautious on what he could do with Superman if DC would let him take more risks and do more interesting things, or if he had to kind of stick to this like predetermined set of rules. And hearing James Gunn talk about really any of the characters in any of his movies, I can't remember if like he's written the scripts for all of the movies as well, but it feels like it, you know, because he knows who these characters are on a fundamental level. He knows what makes them tick. He knows their strengths, their weaknesses, everything. And because of that, I think he can really bring out these strengths and also some of the more interesting flaws of these characters a little bit quicker, a little bit more easy in ways that don't necessarily feel quite as manufactured. This movie is very much a James Gunn movie. It is very flashy, slick, and stylish, and I would say polished, but still a little rough around the edges. Like, you know, you maybe like you polish something and then you drop it on the floor, but you didn't want to polish it again, so like you kind of blew it off a bit, and it looks good, you know, but it's still got enough of that grit. I'd heard going into it that it is like very kind of visually interesting. Like people were saying like, oh, it's like nothing we've ever seen before, and I can see what they mean. At the end of the day, it wasn't like anything super anything like super crazy out of the ordinary. The more I think about it, the way that I would kind of describe it is that it feels very much like a comic book splash page brought to life. And I know that we've heard that before, like with Captain America Civil War, but I think especially with this one, where in a lot of, especially the action scenes, you follow maybe like one or two characters, they do something really cool, and then instead of cutting away to something else, the camera, at least it seems like in one shot, will kind of pivot over to follow the character over here or follow another character as they do something over here, and so everything feels very interconnected and very fluid. I think especially nowadays, let's be honest, even though the MCU is still, I think, very strong, especially in a lot of the more grounded combat scenes, the more hand-to-hand things, there's a lot of cuts, and so it can feel very frenetic. And I think this felt that way too, but in a much more smooth and choreographed way, if that makes sense. In a lot of ways, it felt very ADHD, which I can definitely relate to, because you know, you're watching one character do one thing, and then like, ooh, but what's this over here? And ooh, but they're doing a cool thing over there, and then that robot just exploded over there. And instead of just, you know, cut, it's, you follow it. You kind of go along with it. So in some ways, like, it kind of felt like either a comic book splash page where you're just seeing everything with no panels cutting it up, or like a video game, sort of like the Arkham combat where it's like very free flow and you're like here and then you're jumping over here and blah blah blah. Definitely was a little bit tiring, but I think it never kind of went too long or too overboard. And maybe, like I said, it is just because I am very ADHD and I'm used to kind of having my brain pulled in a million different directions. But I do think it was also a very effective way for getting us in the mindset of Superman. Like, this is what it would feel like to not only have superpowers, but to be fighting other superpowered individuals, where you're like over here, and then you have to go over here, and then, oh, no, this person's about to get shot, so you have to fly over here. I did not see it in 4DX, but I think if I did, I would probably leave that theater with a bit of whiplash, because it, you know, very like THX, just But of course, every Superman movie is only as good as their Superman. And I gotta say, like, David Corenswet is very, very charming. I think he's everything Superman needed to be and should have been, especially after some of the darker takes in recent years. He's very boyish, very like adult Boy Scout, very kind of like Golden Retriever-esque, dare I say, himbo at times, like especially when he's in the Superman suit. There is kind of just this like feeling that overtakes him, and he's happy to be there, and he's happy to chip in and make a difference. Not that he necessarily likes, beating the ever-living hell out of people, but there to make a difference, and he's happy to help. And I think that was really charming. You can tell that he enjoyed being Superman, both the actor and the character. You can tell that David actually not only knows a lot about Superman, but cares about Superman, and he enjoys being there. And I think that does translate then into the character, because there's a sense of fun about it. When he's fighting the Hammer of Bravia in the first act, it felt very, very different from Henry Cavill's Superman, where he's just kind of indiscriminately beating the hell out of things, and buildings are collapses, and it's a CGI mess. And yes, there was a lot of CGI in this as well, but I think it blended enough of sort of the practical effects with the CGI, where it still felt grounded enough, or it still felt like you were following David Corenswet. And in these fights, there is still a sense of weight to them, but there's also a lot more care. Like, he's taking care not to get people caught in the crossfire. He's taking care not to destroy buildings, even if buildings still get destroyed. It's good to be an insurance broker in this universe. But like, he does all of these very heroic things with kind of a sense of glee. Like, he's not smiling the whole time, but you can almost see, like, if you were to slow down the action a bit and pause, like, you could definitely see him smiling, if that makes sense, as he's zooming around and saving squirrels from getting crushed. It didn't ever feel like it was a burden, which I know I'm taking my fate into my own hands here by saying so, but Henry Cavill's Superman, for as good as he was, always kind of felt like being super was a burden. And I get it, and that's a very interesting story to tell depending on the character, but something about Superman, even for as little as I know of him, he never has an issue with what he does. He knows that it's up to him to do it. He's the only person, really, in the grand scheme of things, that can do the things he does. So he takes on this mantle with pride. He's not only representing Krypton and his old family, he's also helping to save his new family, his new friends. And there's never like a weight to it. He genuinely enjoys being there and helping people. There's never really any bitterness. Like, he's grown tired of the responsibility. Like, maybe that's Batman's thing or other superheroes, but Superman, no. Superman does what's right because it's what's right, not because it's what's expected of him. And I think that's what sets David apart from the other ones. The Cavill Superman felt like responsibility was a burden. I think the Christopher Reeves Superman, as classic as it is, to me it almost felt like being super to him was a choice, that it was still something that he chose to do because it was right. Brandon Routh, I think there is more a sense of like he was doing it because it was his responsibility and this and that. Whereas to me, the best way I can think of to describe David is that he looked at this power as like a blessing. Like, he was happy that he had this power, and he was never down by it or burdened by it or tired of it or wish he didn't have it, even when other people are trying to kill him because of it. And that was just really nice to see. Obviously superheroes have always kind of mirrored the current climate in the real world, and our real world currently, it's not doing too hot, you guys. So I could see the temptation to almost go even further into the dark side with Superman. But there's something so nice and refreshing to see a super-powered character just be super and to have fun with it. As much as I do love Batman, and I do love Batman, I will always love Batman, the kind of regression into reality and groundedness and not really paying any attention to like the more fantastical elements has been a bit of a bummer. You can't see him do as much or interact with as many characters. We can't get those more interesting villains like Clayface or Man-Bat, whereas we very clearly are with this new DC universe, which is what I'm very excited about. And of course, speaking of villains, Lex Luthor is another character that I've never necessarily connected with. I don't know if it's like the billionaire aspect of it, then we're just tired of it in our own reality, or if it is because he also is just kind of very serious and dour and almost like too plain. Like, it's another reason why I don't necessarily care for Hugo Strange from Batman. It's cool that like he has this brain power and is so smart, but at the end of the day, even the more grounded villains, like, I kind of want there to be something else to them, some sort of like cool visual flair or powers or whatever. And ultimately, Lex Luthor is just a guy. I know that he gets a special suit eventually, blah blah blah. But that said, I did really like Nicholas Holt's take on him. You know, a lot of the Lexes that we've seen, sort of like with Superman, they've been getting kind of progressively more serious, and they don't have fun per se, or they go too far into the campiness. Like with Jesse Eisenberg and He Who Shall Not Be Named, you know, they get like very campy with it. Whereas I think Nicholas Hoult really towed that line, where he was very serious. He had moments of instability where he didn't quite know what he was going to do next, but he still had a couple little fun moments. Like the scene where Krypto gets kidnapped and Superman goes into his office, and like you can tell that he has fun toying with Superman. Even if, you know, ultimately he wants Superman just wiped off the face of the earth. And so I really did appreciate those moments. Or like when he kills Superman's friend in front of him, like he makes this really kind of dark remark about, oh, well, I thought this game of Russian roulette would last longer, and you're like disappointed. But there's still kind of this pompousness to him, this arrogance, very kind of like, you know who my father is kind of thing. Not quite like, you know, Malfoy, where like he hides behind his father. You can tell that like he was born into a rich family, probably, and has never been told no in his life, and is just used to getting his way. And I know a lot of people have not really cared for his little breakdown at the end where he starts crying, but I liked that. That's what really made Lex interesting for me, more than just kind of a one-note villain, is the fact that like he is so devoted to it. And obviously, every villain thinks they are the hero, but I feel like there's almost always like a part where that ends, that stops being the case. Whereas in Lex's mind, like he thinks not only is he the hero, but he should be the hero, and he's so devoted to what he's doing, to taking down Superman and giving it everything, and he's so petty about it, just not getting his way. He throws a tantrum. Like, I think that was very fun. And so I did really appreciate what they did with the character. If he's not going to be a physical threat for Superman just yet, I did like that they kind of worked his brains into it in that regard. I also thought, jumping back to Superman, I would have liked, I think, a few more Clark Kent scenes. He's barely Clark Kent in this movie, at least around other people. But I think he had really good chemistry with Lois. And I liked what they did with Lois in this one, where unlike, you know, with the Amy Adams, there was kind of like this feistiness and spunk that I didn't really feel in some of the other versions. But I also really liked, you know, this is an alternate reality. This is a reality where they take journalism very seriously. It's not like ours, where you can just kind of say whatever sensational stuff you want and get away with it. There is still this earnestness to Lois and to the other people at the Daily Planet, where, you know, this is a very serious job. Nobody really downplays Lois's ability because she's a woman, or this or that, or like newspapers aren't a thing, blah blah blah. It was just very straightforward, and I appreciated that. I was also really excited to see the Justice Gang, not quite yet the Justice League, because again, like, although I was kind of familiar with Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl to an extent, I didn't know that much about them, and especially Mr. Terrific, who, in my mind, kind of stole the show. Obviously, it's Superman's movie, and he had some great moments, but Mr. Terrific was so cool and so suave, and especially after getting the short stick in the X-Men movies, I was really, really happy that Eddie Gathegi really got to shine in this one. I do think that Mr. Terrific is and will be the standout. It was a nice surprise to kind of learn more about him, and the fact that he is sort of the antithesis of Superman. You have more of the brains versus the brawn, and he's not really superpowered, but he utilizes all this tech that makes him capable. He's very smart. And it was really cool to see a minority, or a couple minorities, in a movie that are capable and get these standout moments. Like his scene with Lois, his fight scene, where he really shows off his powers, is like one of the highlights of the movie, I think, especially having known nothing about him, to see him not only use his powers, but use his powers at the height of his powers. That's another thing that I really appreciated about the movie, was that this universe starts in the middle. You're not seeing any of these characters get their powers. This is not an origin story for anyone. And not saying that we won't see that eventually, but I really appreciated that they let these heroes be heroes. And if they're going to get into the origins of anyone, they can do it later, but show us who these people are, see who they are at the height of their power and capabilities. I thought that was very, very cool. He was a very nice mirror to Superman, where Superman's very kind of calm and level-headed. Mr. Terrific is sort of the opposite. He's almost like the quasi stand-in for Batman. Not necessarily charismatic. He is very cool, very smooth. He knows what he's doing, but he's not necessarily a guy that you would want to like spend a day with. I think he would probably get tired of you long before you got tired of him, and that was nice to see. And I think some people will hopefully even be able to relate to that. I know for me, there was something that, even though he's not really a charming character, was very charming about Mr. Terrific. With my quirks and ADHD and everything, like I've always kind of felt that I have to fit into a certain box or kind of stifle myself for society's sake. And there's something really nice about seeing a hero who is kind of passive-aggressive and knows he's passive-aggressive, and he's very dry and dour almost. He's not dark and brooding like Batman per se. He's still kind of quippy and witty. I don't know if I necessarily want to like use the word neurodivergent, but there was kind of a feel of that at times, which I appreciated. It's nice to see a character that is, even if not explicitly so, kind of hinted at. Guy Gardner as well, a strong standout character. I love Nathan Fillion in general, and so I was really excited to see him get like such a big role, especially after the Suicide Squad, which were, you know, he had a little standout moment, but he wasn't like a big part of it. Whereas I think his kind of quirky, dry delivery really worked for Guy Gardner. I think it would be very easy to make Guy completely a jerk and unlikable, but something about Nathan Fillion is very difficult to dislike, especially after the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern. Seeing him use his powers in a much more just straightforward, bombastic way was really nice. You know, the middle fingers, of course, and all these different weapons. I'm really interested to see where he goes from here and how he then plays off the other lanterns. I've always kind of liked Guy Gardner, that he is not necessarily the best candidate for the Green Lantern ring. He is very brash and abrasive, but yet he still gets his heroic moment. While I don't necessarily need him to have like a whole arc over however many projects he's in, I would like to see how he kind of grows. Isabella Merced plays Hawk Girl. She is definitely like the smallest role of the three. She gets some nice little showcase moments, but there's really not much to her. Even in some of the group scenes, like she'll kind of say her one or two lines and then kind of fade into the back. A little disappointing to see. But I understand that, you know, this cast is so stacked as is. I do believe we'll see a lot more of her in the future films, and I like that she, of all characters, was one that they included in this. I always really liked Hawk Girl in the Justice League cartoon, and just having like a cool power set, you know. Who wouldn't want cool flappy wings? Metamorpho was somebody that I was kind of completely unfamiliar with going into it. For some reason, I always thought he was like a villain. I don't know, maybe just the fact that he looks kind of monstrous and grotesque. So I don't know what I was expecting, but I did really like Anthony Carrigan's take. Anthony Carrigan is another actor that I think is very underappreciated in a lot of the things he does. In the Gotham TV show, in Barry, he always stands out. I do think, you know, he maybe didn't quite get that standout moment here. It was cool to see his powers. I always love a good shapeshifter. The character was very kind of soft-spoken and nervous. I wouldn't say we necessarily saw him at the height of his powers, so I will be interested to see how he grows in future projects. Jimmy, being a ladies' man, I thought was a really nice, fun take on the character. That's another thing I love about James Gunn, is that you can tell he's a big nerd himself, and so he always kind of gives nerds their moment. And seeing that for Jimmy was very nice. Jimmy is usually a character that I don't really pay much attention to, whereas here, I think he was one of the standout characters. And the same goes for Eve as well. She's a character that I think could easily have been just like this simple comic relief, but I think they did just enough with her to make her fun and pop. I did really like that they actually worked her into the action of the movie. You know, so often the kind of secretarial or girlfriend character is kind of just there as like set dressing. She did actually end up playing a part in the plot, which I really like. Same with the engineer. I wasn't really sure what to expect with the engineer. Again, I really like those shape-shifting characters, so I really liked her powers. And that, for me, was an interesting choice for a villain for Superman. Someone that doesn't necessarily share his move set, but can fight him in a very interesting, unique way. I appreciated that they did that. I was a little worried that she might get like the Mystique treatment from that first X-Men movie, where she's there to kind of stand in the background and look menacing. Maybe she says like one or two lines, and then gets a short fight and then gets like thrown out the window. I'm happy to say that's not necessarily the case here. Like she actually played an important part in the plot. Kudos on that. Ultraman, I think for me at least didn't quite fare quite as well, but I don't think they necessarily did as much with him as they could have. I think it would have been interesting for Superman to kind of grapple with the fact that, you know, this is technically another Kryptonian, even if he is like this bastardized creation of Lex. It would have been cool to get at least like a scene or two of kind of inner turmoil. If his whole planet's been destroyed, wouldn't he want to help save this guy? But I do think we'll see Ultraman again in the future. It does seem like he's kind of hinting at Bizarro. That could be interesting to see. And then Krypto, of course. You know, with animals in superhero movies like this, there's always that risk of being the cute kind of mascot character where they just get brought in to sell merch, basically, or provide like a cute little, oh, Krypto moment here and there. And we did get a little bit of that. I do think maybe Krypto played a bit too much of a part in some of the fights. But I did actually appreciate that they kind of sidelined Krypto for the middle of the movie. He was still very cute. Obviously, he is a standout. I can see a lot more of him in the future, especially knowing who his real owner is. Other than that, Ma and Pa Kent were nice. It was nice seeing, especially being from Kansas myself, it was nice seeing them kind of play up that country aspect to them. Like they had, maybe not entirely authentic accents, but they had country accents, and they lived in like a double wide trailer. It wasn't like, you know, just a big like farmhouse. Like there was an authenticity to it. They weren't overused either. Like they had their one or two scenes to charm us, to show us why Superman is the way he is with his upbringing, but they didn't feel too overused. Again, it's not an origin story. And I did really appreciate what they did with kind of the parental storyline of taking Jor-El and, you know, making him not a great guy. And maybe that is just because I'm not a Superman purist. Personally, I really liked that little twist. And to me, it wasn't even like making him into a villain, especially being a refugee. Like this is probably what they would do. And to them, it's not anything bad. They have to propagate their race, continue the bloodline. And to me, like obviously, not that great to enslave an entire race of people and you make them your concubines and everything. Not too hot on that idea, but I didn't necessarily see it as a villainous thing so much as just like this is what they're used to, this is what they do. So I liked that take on it, and I liked that kind of grappling that Clark then had of, you know, how much of that does he have to stick with? You know, how much of his parents' legacy does he need to honor, obligated to honor, questioning who his real parents were, and using the lessons that he was taught, the love that he was given, to remind him who he really is. I thought that was a very powerful thing, and it really hit home for me without getting into things too much. Legacy is always something that I kind of grapple with as well, having a parental figure that was not the best person, but still, you know, I can tell is very much in me somewhere. And how much of that should I honor? How much of that should I ignore? How much of it should I acknowledge but not pay much attention to, etc., etc. And so it was nice to see a superhero grapple with that and ultimately kind of learn the same thing that I've been learning, which is we are all kind of a product of our environment more so than our blood. Going back to Batman Begins, it's not who you are underneath, but what you do that defines you. Realizing that, you know, he thought he was the last hope of this planet, and he got so much comfort from these people. It was really kind of just the idea of them that comforted him, not so much the people themselves. Whereas he had everything that he needed, everything he wanted the whole time. And he just had to realize it and discover his power. And obviously that speech at the end was very, very inspiring and relatable, I think, for everybody. We are all ultimately just trying to do our best, to put one foot in front of the other and just make it through the day. And to ground a superhero in that regard, especially someone who is not technically human, but to give them such a human emotion, I think that's how you got to do it. To ground a hero is not necessarily to take them or make them like depower them or things like that. It's just to make them think and feel and do the same things that we do. And I don't think that made him look weak at all. I think, if anything, it made him look even stronger. The fact that he fights the real fight, the good fight. Yes, he's out there like tackling these intergalactic wars, but he's also just getting up in the morning, listening to his favorite crappy band. He's grabbing some delicious halal food and just trying to get through the day. You know, Superman, to me, again, before what little I know of him, he's that one superhero who, while he loves being a superhero, he also loves the other side of it. He is super, and he knows he's super, but he doesn't want to brag. He doesn't want to play it up. He doesn't want, you know, the fame that's associated with it. He, in a lot of ways, like, he values the introversion more than the extroversion. And so I really loved seeing that side as well. And that's where I would have liked maybe a little bit more Clark, so we could see kind of the difference between the two. As is, you know, 90 to 95% of the movie, he is Superman. So we don't really get that juxtaposition. So I hope we do in future films, kind of like with the Robert Pattinson Bruce. I would like to see more Bruce. I was really touched and charmed that they allowed a superhero to show emotion, to show just like plain everyday emotion, which some people might consider weak, but ultimately is like, I think, kind of the strongest thing that you could do. So that was very, very nice, and that, I think, is what we need more of. I know James Gunn has said that like every film in the DC will have its own identity, but I do think with the future Superman movies, or at least whenever he's on the screen, that we have to have that optimism, that joy, plucky, can-do attitude. We can't lose it. I think the moment that we start losing that is when he just doesn't feel like Superman anymore. I am interested to see like when Batman gets brought in, just in general, but also to see how he plays off of Superman, to see how, and if he even can kind of like draw this version of Superman out of that mindset. So that'll be interesting to see. I'm very excited to see not only where he goes, but these other heroes as well, Mr. Terrific and Hot Girl and Guy Gardner. I'm just excited to see like what they do, because all of them in their own way were fun and likable. Even Lex, who's like a shitty person, there's still like a groundedness to him. Like I get it. Like, we've all been so petty at the end of the day that we're willing to do just whatever it takes to get what we want. And I think that's what makes it makes a good villain. It makes a good universe as well. I love feeling that like these are characters that I could see in this universe, no matter how much they stand out. And I'm interested to see as well like how visual style grows as well. Obviously, this was a very uniquely visual movie, and I'm excited to see how that changes and grows. And if we do see more of like that kind of weird like fisheye lens thing that he kind of does, like big close-ups, like it's very comic booky, very schlocky. So I could see why it would be a bit much for people. I could see him maybe drawing back on some of it, but I hope he just kind of goes full out, gives us those weird moments. And I do think that every superhero, at the end of the day, should have those campy moments. Even Batman, even like the really dark, dour Batman, should have those moments where you have to acknowledge that this is just like, it's ridiculous what we're doing here. So play into it a bit more. But yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised by this movie. I was not expecting to like it as much as I did. I was not expecting it to kind of stick in my mind as much as it did, and inspire me as much as it did too. Still, at the end of the day, I'm still a Batman guy through and through. Unfortunately, I do not share Superman's super optimistic outlook on life. I do try to be very hopeful, very positive, but there's always going to be that seed of bitterness and grit and angst to me that will just kind of bring me back over to Batman every time. But I am very excited for DC in a way that I have not been in a very long time. Sans Batman. If I had to rate it, I don't know. I would probably give it 8 out of 10. It wasn't perfect, but I did love, and it made the inner like comic book nerdy kid in me very happy that he just threw caution to the wind and devoted himself to the camp and the schlock and everything. And I think we need more of that. And I'm excited to see where it goes. More of this, more superpowered individuals, more comic book movies that are allowed to be unrealistic. I know we're getting Supergirl next. I am looking forward to that. I know we're getting Clayface in about a year, and that I'm very looking forward to. It does finally feel like DC can be DC to kind of balance the darkness and the light in a way that even Marvel doesn't necessarily do. So very optimistic. Kudos all around. If you have not seen Superman yet, go out and see it. Support it while it's in theaters. Even if you don't love every single thing about it, we gotta start somewhere. So go support it. Make your opinion heard. Just give it a chance. Forget all the toxic haters. I guarantee you most of them have seen the movie too and have probably liked it more than they're letting on. So yeah, go support it. Go see movies and put some goodness out there. Put some hope out there as Superman would want us to do. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really do appreciate it. I will be back soon with more creepy Crowlection content, but in the meantime, don't forget, stay spooky.